Continuing Flamininus from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. This seemed the most glorious part of all his succeeding triumph, for these redeemed Romans, as it is the custom for slaves upon their manumission, to shave their heads and wear felt hats. Not quite like the Shriners do, but that's what it makes you think of, right? Well, because a lot of old people lose their hair and whatnot, but followed in the habit of the procession to add to the glory of this show. There were the Grecian helmets, the Macedonian targets, and long spears, borne with the rest of the spoils in public view, besides vast sums of money. Tuditanus says 3,713 pounds weight of massy gold, 43,270 of silver, 14,514 pieces of coin gold called Philippix, which was all over and above the 1,000 talents which Philip owed, and which the Romans were afterwards prevailed upon, chiefly by the mediation of Titus, to remit to Philip, declaring him their ally and confederate, and sending him home his hostage son. Shortly after, Antiochus entered Greece with a numerous fleet and a powerful army, soliciting the cities there to sedition and revolt. Abetted in all and seconded by the Attalians, who for this long time had borne a grudge and secret enmity to the Romans, and now suggested to him, by the way of a cause and pretext of war, that he came to bring the Greeks liberty, when indeed they never wanted it less, as they were free already, but in lack of really honorable grounds, he was instructed to employ these lofty professions. The Romans, in the interim, in the great apprehension of revolutions and revolt in Greece, and of his great reputation for military strength, dispatched the consul Manius Achilleus to take the charge of the war, and Titus as his lieutenant, out of regard to the Greeks, some of whom he no sooner saw, but he confirmed them in the Roman interests. Others, who began to falter, like a timely physician, by the use of the strong remedy of their own affection for himself, he was able to arrest in the first stage of the disease, before they had committed themselves any great error. Some few there were whom the Attalians were before hand with, and had so wholly perverted that he could do no good with them. Yet those, however angry, exasperated before, he saved and protected when the engagement was over, for Antiochus, receiving a defeat at Thermopylae, not only fled the field, but hoisted sail instantly for Asia. Manius, the consul, himself invaded and besieged a part of the Attalians, while King Philip had permission to reduce the rest. Thus, while, for instance, the Lapes and Magnesians on one hand, and the Athenians and Aparentians on the other, were ransacked by the Macedonians, and while Manius laid Heraclea waste and besieged Naupactus, then in the Attalians' hands, Titus, still with a compassionate care for Greece, sailed across from Peloponnesus to the consul, and began first of all to chide him that the victory should be owing alone to his arms, and yet he should suffer Philip to bear away the prize and profit the war, and set wreaking his anger upon a single town, whilst the Macedonians overran several nations and kingdoms. But as he happened to stand there in view of the besieged, they no sooner spied him out, but they called to him from their wall. They stretched forth their hands they supplicate and entreat him. At the same time, he said not a word more. For turning about, with tears in his eyes, and went away, some little after he discovered the matter so effectually with Manius, that he won him over from his passion, and prevailed with him to give a truce and time to the Attalians to send deputies to Rome to petition the Senate for terms of moderation. But the hardest task, and that which put Titus to the greatest difficulty, was to entreat with Manius for the Chalcidians, who had incensed him on account of a marriage which Antiochus had made in their city, even whilst the war was on foot, a match no ways suitable. In point of age, he, an elderly man, being enamored with a mere girl, and well, when we're reading Greek stuff, you're not sure that you're actually talking about a young woman, and as a little proper for the time, in the midst of war, she was the daughter of one Plutarch, and it is said to have been wonderfully beautiful. The Chalcidians, in consequence, embraced the king's interests with zeal and alacrity, and let him make their city the basis of his operations during the war. Thither, therefore, he made with all speed, when he was routed and fled, reaching Chalcis, different, without making any stay, taking this young lady and his money and friends with him. Away he sails to Asia, which is, I know they later named the continent after that, but it's not the continent, it's just a small area, relatively, And now Manius's indignation, carrying him in all haste against the Chalcidians, Titus hurried after him, endeavoring to pacify and entreat him, and at length succeeded both with him and the chief men among the Romans. The Chalcidians, thus owing their lives to Titus, dedicated to him all the best and the most magnificent of their sacred buildings, inscriptions upon which may be seen to run thus to this day: the people dedicate this gymnasium to Titus and Hercules. So again, the people consecrate the Delphinium to Titus and Hercules. And what is yet more, even in our time, a priest of Titus was formally elected and declared after the sacrifice and libation. They sing a set song, much of which, for the length of it, we omit, but shall transcribe the closing verses. The Roman faith, whose aid of yore our vows were offered to implore, we worship now and evermore, to Rome, to Titus, and to Jove. O maidens in the dances move, dances and Eopatans too, unto the Roman faith are due, O Saviour Titus, and to you. Other parts of Greece also heaped honors upon him suitable to his merits, and what made all those honors true and real was the surprising goodwill and affection which his moderation and equity of character had won for him. For if he were at any time at variance with anybody in matters of business, or out of emulation and rivalry, as with Philopaemen, and again with Diophantus, when in office as general of the Achaeans, his resentment never went far, nor did it ever break out into acts, but when it had vented itself in some citizen-like freedom of speech, there was an end of it. In fine, nobody charged malice or bitterness upon his nature, though many imputed hastiness and levity to it. In general, he was the most attractive and agreeable of companions, and could speak to both grace and forcibility. For instance, to divert the Achaeans from the conquest of the Isle of Zacynthus, if, he said, they put their head too far out, Peloponnesius, they may hazard themselves as much as a tortoise out of his shell. Again, when he and Philip first met to treat of a cessation and peace, the latter complaining that Titus came with a mighty train, while he himself came along and unattended. Yes, replied Titus, you have left yourself alone by killing your friends. At another time, Dinocrates the Messenian, having drunk too much at a merry meeting in Rome, danced there in women's clothes, and the next day addressed himself to Titus for assistance in his design to get Messene out of the hands of the Achaeans. And isn't Chalcedon or something like that, like the name of Chalcedon, the name of tortoises, terrapins, and turtles? But you know, many of them died through the years because people, like particularly now that there's cartoons, you think you can't, like a turtle can live without its shell, but a turtle, it feels through its shell. And, well, the tortoise, terrapin, whatever, and its spine is part of its shell, so it doesn't work. Even the spiny soft shell turtle that's, that they got in Florida with those little pig noses. Cuter than a regular pig, I think, but, this, replied Titus, will we master for consideration. My only surprise is that a man with such purposes on his hands should be able to dance and sing at drinking parties, when again the ambassadors of Antiochus were recounting to those of Achaia the various multitudes composing the royal master's forces, and rang over a long catalogue of hard names. I supped once, said Titus, with a friend, and could not forbear expostulating with him at the number of dishes he had provided, and said, I wondered where he had furnished himself with such a variety. Sir, replied he, to confess the truth, it is all hog's flesh, differently cooked. And so, men of Achaia, when you are told of Antiochus, is lancers and pikemen and foot guards, I advise you not to be surprised, since in fact they are all Syrians, differently armed. And one of the things about eating, it does help if you, have enough water or tea or something like that to not overeat or something. But it's funny somehow that doesn't stop one's stomach from growling and all that. Sometimes, that's why you need to think when you eat. What you need to do, what you should do. After his achievements in Greece, and when the war with Antiochus was at an end, Titus was created censor, the most eminent office, and, in a manner, the highest preferment in the Commonwealth. And of course, there's actually more risk. There's new risks to eating swine's flesh if it was per se properly cooked. There's more risk, but not being properly cooked was more common back then. But that really, anyways, the son of Marcellus, who had been 5 times consul, was his colleague. These, by virtue of their office, cashiered 4 senators of no great distinction, and admitted to the roll of citizens all freeborn residents. But this was more by constraint than their own choice, for Terentius Clough, then tribune of the people, despite the nobility, spurred on the populace to order it to be done. At this time, the two greatest and most eminent persons in the city, Africanus Scipio and Marcus Cato, were at variance. Titus named Scipio first member of the Senate, and involved himself in a quarrel with Cato. On the following unhappy occasion, Titus had a brother, Lucius Flamininus, very unlike him in all points of character, and in particular low and dissolute in his pleasures, and flagrantly regardless of all decency. He kept as a companion a boy whom he used to carry about with him, not only when he had troops under his charge, but even when the care of a province was committed to him. One day, at a drinking bout, when the youngster was wantoning with Lucius, "I love you, sir, so dearly," said he, "that, preferring your satisfactions to my own, I came away without seeing the gladiators. Though I have never seen a man killed in my life." Lucius, delighted with what the boy said, answered, "Let not that trouble you, I can satisfy that longing." And with that orders a condemned man to be fetched out from the prison, and executioner to be sent for, and commands him to strike off the man's head before they rose from the table. Valerius Antias only so far varies the story as to make it a woman for whom he did it, but Livy says that in Cato's own speech the statement is that a Gaulish deserter, coming with his wife and children to the door, Lucius took him into the banqueting room and killed him with his own hand to gratify his paramour Cato. It is probable, might say this by way of aggravation of the crime, but that the slain was no such fugitive, but a prisoner, and one condemned to die, not to mention other authorities. Cicero tells us in his treatise on old age, where he brings in Cato himself giving that account of the matter. However, this is certain: Cato during his censorship made a severe scrutiny into the senators' lives in order to the purging and reforming the house, and expelled Lucius, though he had been once consul before, and though the punishment seemed to reflect dishonor on his brother also. And we have the pleasure seekers and stuff amongst the Greeks, so they're not, it's not hedonism, it's not Epicureanism, they're not really regarding. But when you have spiritual principles of eating, other than in the name of, in remembrance of, dedication after, we find that the khanzir, as the Quran calls it, are pretty much universally forbidden. Same thing with being intoxicated. Well, that's not as universally forbidden in some traditions, but you know what I mean. It's the obvious excesses with that. The dirty, the foul, the garbage eaters and the things, the predatory animals and stuff like this. And then there's other taboos that are, well, not as important for health, not as risky per se, but not ideal. But very often it's like, well, our sacred animals this, so we don't eat that, or some story that's not really. Both of them presented themselves to the assembly of the people in a suppliant manner, not without tears in their eyes, requesting that Cato might show the reason and cause of his fixing such a stain upon so honorable a family. The citizens thought it a modest and moderate request. Cato, however, without any retraction or reserve, at once came forward, and standing up with his colleague, interrogated Titus as to whether he knew the story of the supper. Titus answered in the negative. Cato related it, and challenged Lucius to a formal denial of it. Lucius made no reply, whereupon the people adjudged the disgrace just and suitable, and waited upon Cato home from the tribunal in great state. But Titus still so deeply resented his brother's degradation that he allied himself with those who had long borne a grudge against Cato, and winning over a major part of the Senate, he revoked and made void all the contracts, leases, and bargains made by Cato relating to the public revenues, and also got numerous actions and accusations brought against him, carrying on against a lawful magistrate and excellent citizens, for the sake of one who was indeed his relation, but was unworthy to be so, if he had but gotten his deserts, a course of bitter and violent attacks, which it would be hard to say were either right or patriotic. Afterwards, however, at a public spectacle in the theatre, at which the senators appeared, as usual, sitting as become their rank, in the first seats, when Lucius was spied at the lower end, seated in a mean, dishonorable place, it made a great impression upon the people, nor could they endure the sight, but kept calling out to him to move, until he did move, and went in amongst those of consular dignity, and received them into their seats. This natural ambition of Titus was well enough looked upon by the world, whilst the wars we have given a relation of afforded competent fuel to feed it, as for instance, when, after the expiration of his consulship, he had a command as military tribune, which nobody pressed upon him, but being now out of all employ in the government and advanced in years, he showed his defects more plainly, allowing himself, in this inactive remainder of life, to be carried away with the passion for reputation, as uncontrollable as any youth. Some such transport, it is thought, betrayed him into a proceeding against Hannibal, which lost him the regard of many. Now, if you're going to be put in government position and you don't qualify, or you know you aren't going to do a good job, it's it's better you don't, For Hannibal, having fled his country, first took sanctuary with Antiochus, and he having been glad to obtain a peace after the battle in Phrygia, Hannibal was put to shift for himself by a second flight, and after wandering through many countries, fixed at length in Bithynia, proffering his service to King Prasius. Every one at Rome knew where he was, but looked upon him, now in his weakness and old age, with no sort of apprehension, as one whom fortune had quite cast off. Titus, however, coming thither as ambassador, though he was sent from the Senate to Prasius upon another errand, yet seeing Hannibal resident there, it stirred up resentment in him to find that he was yet alive, and though Prasius used much intercession and entreaties in favor of him as his suppliant and familiar friend, Titus was not to be entreated. There was an ancient oracle, it seems, which prophesied thus of Hannibal's end. Libusan earth shall Hannibal enclose. He interpreted this to mean of the African Libya, and that he should be buried in Carthage. They didn't Carthage. They didn't pronounce the G as a J, so as if he might yet expect to return and call his life there. But there is a sandy place in Bithynia, bordering on the sea, and near it a little village called Libassa. It was Hannibal's chance to be staying here, and having ever from the beginning had a distrust of easiness and cowardice of Prasius, and a fear of the Romans, he had long before ordered 7 underground passages to be dug from his house, leading from his lodging and running a considerable distance in various opposite directions, all undiscernible from without. As soon, therefore, as he heard what Titus had ordered, he attempted to make his escape through these minds, but finding them beset with the king's guards, he resolved upon making away with himself. Some say that, wrapping his upper garment about his neck, he commanded his servant to set his knee against his back, and not to cease twisting and pulling it till he had completely strangled him. Others say he drank bull's blood, after the example of Themistocles and Metis. Livy writes that he had a poison in readiness, which he mixed for the purpose, and that, taking the cup in his hand, "Let us ease," said he, "the Romans of their continual dread and care, who think it long and tedious to await the death of a hated old man. Yet Titus will not bear away a glorious victory, nor one worthy of those ancestors who sent to caution Pyrrhus, an enemy and conqueror too, against the poison prepared for him by traitors." Thus various are the reports of Hannibal's death, but when the news of it came to the senator's ears, some felt indignation against Titus for it, blaming as well his officiousness as his cruelty, who, when there was nothing to urge it, out of a mere appetite for distinction, to have it said that he had caused Hannibal's death, sent him to his grave when he was now, like a bird in that old age has lost its feathers, and incapable of flying. To let alone, to live tamely without molestation. Being bothered, not what we now mean by that phrase. They began also now to regard with increased admiration the clemency and magnanimity of Scipio Africanus, and called to mind how he, when he had vanquished in Africa the Till, then invincible and terrible, Hannibal, neither banished him in his country, nor exacted of his countrymen that they should give him up. At a parley just before they joined battle, Scipio gave him his hand, and in the peace made after it, he put no hard article upon him, nor insulted over his fallen fortune. It is told, too, that they had another meeting afterwards at Ephesus, and that when Hannibal, as they were walking together, took the upper hand, Africanus let it pass, and walked on without the least notice of it, and that then they began to talk of generals, and Hannibal affirmed that Alexander was the greatest commander the world had seen. Next to him, Pyrrhus, and the third was himself, Africanus, with a smile said, "What would you have said if I had not defeated you?" "I would not then, Scipio," he replied, "have made myself the third, but the first commander." Such conduct was much admired in Scipio, and that of Titus, who had it as it were insulted the dead whom another had slain, was no less generally found fault with. But not that, but there were some who applauded the action, looking upon a living Hannibal as a fire which only wanted blowing to become a flame. And when he was in the prime and flower of his age, it was not his body nor his hand that had been so formidable, but his consummate skill and experience, together with his innate malice and rancor against the Roman name, things which do not impair with age. For the temper and bent of the soul remains constant, while fortune continually varies, and some new hope might easily rouse to a fresh attempt those whose hatred made them enemies to the last. And what really happened afterwards does, to a certain extent, tend yet further to the exculpation of Titus Aristonicus, of the family of a common musician, upon the reputation of being the son of Eumenes, filled all Asia with tumults and rebellion. Then again, Mithridates, after his defeats by Sulla and Fimbria, and vast slaughter as well among his prime officers as common soldiers, made head again and proved a most dangerous enemy against Lucullus, both by sea and land. Hannibal was never reduced to so contemptible a state as Caius Marius. He had the friendship of a king, and the free exercise of his faculties employed and charged in the navy, over the horse and foot of Precius, whereas those who but now were laughing to hear of Marius wandering about Africa, destitute and begging, in no long time after were seen entreating his mercy in Rome, with his rods at their backs and his axes at their necks. So true it is that looking to the possible future, we can call nothing that we see, either great or small, as nothing puts an end to the mutability and vicissitude of things, but what puts an end to their very being. Some authors accordingly tell us that Titus did not do this of his own head, but that he was joined in commission with Lucius, Scipio, and that the whole object of the embassy was to effect Hannibal's death. And now, as we find no further mention in history of anything done by Titus, either in war or in the administration of the government, but simply that he died in peace, it is time to look upon him as he stands in comparison with Philopoemen.